Close your eyes for a moment. In the middle of the North Atlantic, waves pound against the hull. 50, 60 men, a wooden ship, a voyage lasting weeks, no toilet, no enclosed cabin, no privacy. Wet wool, the smell of salt spray. The sweat of men who have been rowing for hours soaked into everything. By all logic, this ship should be a mass grave. Cholera, dysentery, typhus, take your pick, one contaminated water barrel, one infected hand, and the entire crew should be bedridden within days. But history shows us the exact opposite. These men reached Iceland. They settled in Greenland. They set foot on the shores of North America 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. And here's the truly surprising part. In the same era, medieval Europe, with its libraries, its hospitals, its surgeons, was being dragged toward outright catastrophe on that very same sea, fighting the very same germs. Same sea, 2 different fates. Let's go back to the 12th century, the age of the Crusades. Enormous fleets carrying soldiers to the Holy Land, enclosed cargo holds, airless decks, water barrels waiting in the dark. Below deck, dysentery and typhus spread faster than any Seljuk army ever could. Men who had survived sword strikes and sieges died aboard ship without ever seeing the enemy. During the Third Crusade, deaths from disease outnumbered casualties on the battlefield. Even 8 centuries later, this problem still hadn't been solved. A British warship equipped with modern sanitation, a doctor, and strict discipline lost dozens of crew members to cholera in just 2 weeks. Now let's rewind further to the 9th century. Picture a Viking ship 30 meters long and less than 3 meters wide. 60 oarsmen working in shifts, sleeping between the rowing benches, eating cold rations. No surgeon, no sick bay, no rules, no toilet. When a storm hit, there was no lower deck to take shelter in because there was no lower deck at all. Wet hands gripped the same oar minutes apart. Food passed through fingers that hadn't touched clean water in days. And yet, year after year, decade after decade, Viking fleets set out, raided, traded, and came home. No epidemics, no collapse, same ocean, same bacteria, an entirely different outcome. So what did the Vikings know that medieval Europe never figured out? Let's break the myth. Hollywood gave us an image of filthy Vikings with matted hair and rotten teeth. But the archaeological record says the opposite. When the Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan encountered Norse traders on the banks of the Volga River in the 920s, one detail stood out enough for him to write it down. These men washed every single day, passing a shared basin of water from hand to hand, but doing so regularly. 3 centuries later, the English chronicler John of Wallingford recorded a complaint about the Vikings who had settled in England. They combed their hair daily, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes often. His complaint had nothing to do with violence or plunder. This meticulousness made Viking men far too attractive in the eyes of English women. Across graves excavated from Scandinavia to England, to Iceland, the same objects turn up again and again: bone combs, tweezers, ear-cleaning tools, a complete grooming kit buried right alongside weapons and tools. These were not the grave goods of barbarians. They belonged to a people who treated cleanliness as part of their identity. It wasn't one solution. It was a system. The Viking ship itself was the first piece of this puzzle. In vessels excavated over more than a century, the Oseberg, the Gokstad, the Skuldelev fleet in Roskilde Fjord, archaeologists have found the same absence every time. No chamber pot, no toilet, no waste area, because none was needed. The freeboard of a Viking ship, the distance between the waterline and the edge of the deck, was only about half a meter. Standing at the bow and reaching out, your fingers would touch the water. Human waste went straight into the sea, and moving salt water diluted the pathogens within seconds. In rough weather, wooden buckets served as a temporary solution, but nothing was ever stored. Even the hull of the ship was part of this system. Planks overlapped and sealed with tarred animal hair were never fully watertight. Seawater constantly seeped in, and the crew bailed the bilge every day. Any residue was carried out to sea within hours. There was no standing water, no oxygen-starved pockets where bacteria could breed. On crusader ships, it was the opposite. Enclosed holds, deep and sealed bilges, weeks of accumulated waste. These ships turned into floating breeding grounds for disease. Bilge fever, a form of blood poisoning caused by organic matter rotting in stagnant seawater, remained the nightmare of sailors well into the 19th century. Drinking water tells the same story. Fresh water kept in wooden barrels turned deadly within weeks. The Vikings carried light beer and soured milk instead. Drinks accidentally pasteurized during production, making it harder for bacteria to grow. Whether this was a conscious choice or simply a matter of taste is still debated, but the outcome was the same: survival. Coming ashore was a reset. The Vikings never stayed at sea indefinitely. Over 200 harbor sites have been identified from Norway to Newfoundland. A network connected by roughly a day's sail. Every landing was a hygiene reset. Waste was absorbed into the soil. Clothes were washed in streams. Bodies were scrubbed with sand and cold water. In Old Norse, laugardagur, bathing day, is the root of the modern Scandinavian word for Saturday. Every 7 days, without exception, bathing wasn't a luxury, but a cultural obligation. Daily combing was just as non-negotiable. Those finely carved combs, found in graves, were actually medical tools. They physically removed the lice that spread typhus before the lice could lay eggs. The difference was culture, not knowledge. Excavations at Coppergate in York uncovered simple but functional pit latrines in Viking homes. The so-called Lloyd's Bank coprolite, a fossilized Viking stool discovered in 1972, carried traces of intestinal parasites. The Vikings weren't immune to disease, but they managed to keep it under control. In the same centuries, medieval London or Paris looked very different. Chamber pots were emptied from upper floors into the street. Open sewers ran past market stalls, and butchers dumped their waste into the very water sources people drank from. And most strikingly, the dominant medical opinion of the time held that hot water opened the pores of the skin and let disease enter the body. People were actively discouraged from bathing. Behind the Viking system, there was no law, no inspector, only shame and social pressure. On a 60-oar ship, reputation was the currency of survival. Looking unkempt or lice-ridden wasn't a personal failing. It was a threat to the whole crew. Every man became part of a shared line of defense. Medieval Europe chose the opposite path. Hygiene was an individual choice when it was considered at all. The cost of that choice arrived in 1347. The Black Death wiped out somewhere between a third and half of Europe's population, a full 50 million people. The system itself was a form of knowledge. Two civilizations faced the very same enemies, the same parasites, the same bacteria, the same routes of transmission. One made hygiene part of its culture, the other left it to chance. The Vikings knew nothing of germ theory. They couldn't explain why their system worked, but observations passed down through generations. A chain of habits turned into ritual, produced a public health system that outperformed civilizations with libraries and royal physicians. Sometimes the deepest knowledge isn't found in books. It's kept in habits. The next time you wash your hands, think of a man kneeling by a wooden basin 1,000 years ago. He couldn't have explained why it worked. He only knew it kept his crew alive.